In your ELA notebook today, you're going to turn to the table of contents. You're going to write prose, poetry, drama, ... page 33 through 38. Then you're going to turn to page 33, and you will glue this first page down and make sure that you write page 33 on there. So, and prose is like a story. It's like a narrative. These are the elements of prose. You have characters, who's in your story, setting, where, and when the story takes place. A lot of students, when they think of setting, they just tell the where part, but it's where and when. Plot is what happens in the story. That's where you have your problem and solution. Point of view is who's telling the story. We've studied point of view. The theme is the lesson or the message of the story. And the mood is the feeling created by the story. If it's sad, happy, that kind of thing. On page 34, you're going to glue down this page, which is also elements of prose. The only thing that's different here is this one says dialogue. The other paper did not say dialogue, and this one does. And dialogue is important, especially in our narratives. They have to have the characters speaking to each other. Everything else of the prose is the same. So that should be glued down onto page 34. And those are the elements of prose, which is just narratives or stories. Now, if we look on page 35, you need to glue down this onto page 35. And these are elements of poetry. So poetry is written in verse or lines. And verses that are grouped together like a paragraph are called a stanza. So when you have a chunk of a poem, it's called a stanza. Poetry is written in meter, which means it has patterns or syllables. And the rhythm is the beat of the poem. Now, that doesn't mean... Oh, and then we have rhyme. Words that sound the same. Y'all know what rhyme is. Not all poems rhyme, but a lot of them do. Rhythm and meter go hand in hand. Usually there's a certain number of beats per verse, or beats per line, or beats per stanza. They have specific types of poetry like haikus that have certain meter and rhythm that you have to meet in order to be considered a haiku. There's other types of poetry that follow certain rules as well. So that was on page 35. Now if we look on page 36, you need to glue down this page on page 36. Most of the elements here are the same, but there are a couple that was not on the first page, on page 35. First of all, lines, that's called verse on the other page, verse. Yeah, I spelled that right. So sometimes in poetry we have repetition. So sometimes the last word in a stanza will always repeat. So it could be words or phrases that repeat. That's repetition. Theme is a lesson or a message in the poem. That's something that was also in prose, but it can also be in poetry. We've talked about rhyme and stanzas in the last one. We talked about meter in the last one. So mood is the feeling, like if it's a happy poem, a sad poem, that kind of thing. And figurative language. So this was not on the last page, page 35, but it is on this one, and it's very important. Poetry has a lot of figurative language. We've studied figurative language. That's like similes, metaphors, personification, hyperboles, idioms. Those are all words that are being descriptive, but they have different meanings than their literal meaning. Like, it's raining cats and dogs does not mean it's literally coming down with cats and dogs outside. That's figurative language. Our last two notes are on plays or dramas. So you need to glue this down onto page 37 and write page 37 on it. So a play is a script, okay? Actors use to learn the play. So the actors are the people who are performing in the play. It has dialogue just like a prose has dialogue. Those are the words that the characters say. So in the script, it'll give you a list of characters and it'll say who's going to say which words. And the actors have to learn those words. Setting, just like in prose, you have a where and a when for setting. Stage directions is not in prose or poetry, but it tells the actors how to act. Like if you're supposed to smile or act mad or wave or something like that. It tells the actors what to do. And then we have the cast of characters, which is who's in the play, and those will be the people who have the dialogue. That is on page 37. Now we're going to look at page 38. So you need to glue this down on page 38. We're going to look at a play in more detail, and we're going to look at some of the same elements again that was on page 37, but we're going to tell how these elements help the reader. Okay, so once this is glued down, we're going to fill this in together. So the first one is a playwright, which is kind of like the script. And the way that that helps us is it helps us understand the purpose. Helps to understand the purpose. Like why the play or drama was written. Cast of characters, that's the characters who are in the play and their parts, what part they were going to be playing. And usually a different person usually one person does not play multiple parts. They can sometimes, but usually they don't. So the cast of characters shows us who will be in the play, helps us understand who is in the play, and sometimes it'll give us a description. Gives description of characters. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it'll say like Bob, 12-year-old boy, Sarah, Bob's mom. So it's not just telling you the character, but it's also telling you a description of that character. The narrator, that's a part in the play that tells details the characters don't know or details about the setting. Okay, so it's not, the narrator's like an all-knowing person in the play. He knows things that the characters don't necessarily know. So the way that a narrator helps us is it gives us information we might not know about the story or the characters. Gives information we might not know about the characters or story. All right, dialogue. We should be familiar with dialogue since we include dialogue in our narratives. Those are the lines that the characters say. The narrator will also have some dialogue. And the way that dialogue helps us is it helps us to make inferences about the characters. Let's see, to make inferences about the characters. So by using what they say, we can make inferences about the characters. All right, so let's scroll up a little bit here. Here we go. So the next part of a play or drama is the acts. So a large section of the play, it may include several scenes. We'll talk about a scene in just a minute. But they're put together in acts, like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. If you've ever been to a play like on stage, a lot of times between acts they'll have an intermission. All right, so acts are a large section of the play, and the way that they help us is it's like a chapter, and it helps us to know that the setting or characters has changed. So, like a chapter helps us know the setting or characters have changed. All right, so scenes. Scenes are smaller sections of a play. When a scene changes, often the settings or characters change. So you'll have like multiple scenes within an act. It is a smaller section of the play. And this, like, it already tells us how it happens, how it helps us, because it shows that the characters or setting changes, which is basically the same thing the act does. So shows that characters or setting has changed. All right, the stage directions. They're words in italics and brackets or parentheses that tell us what the character is doing. Details, or it can tell us details about the setting. So, for example, it'll say something like exit stage left, wave towards Fred, sit on the sofa, those kinds of things. Those are stage directions. And the way that those help us is it helps us to understand and visualize the setting or characters. To understand and visualize, the setting or characters. So when you're just reading a play or a drama, those stage directions help you to put that picture in your head, what you would be seeing if it was on a stage. And then finally we have props. Those are objects needed to perform the play, and they help us to visualize the objects used, and it helps the people to perform the play. So helps to visualize the play and helps characters perform. That would be if they were actually performing on a stage. What the plays and dramas that we're going to read this week, they're not going to be performed. They are just going to be read in your reading textbook. So if you have any questions, you can send me an email.